Hi everyone, how are you guys doing? My name is John Writing Gifa. I'm your host for today. A game designer and an AR and VR designer. Right, so we'll be talking about branding with confidence, right? And I mean, like most people are not confident as designers, right? And most people don't know how to stand by what they like make. Like everybody's always like scared, kind of. So Essel is here to give us that. I don't want to say ginger, but that ginger to be able to present our branding ideas with confidence and stand by it, and also to learn as brand designers. So, Essel, are you here?
I am. I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah, all right. I can't pronounce your surname again. I told you that's going to be like this.
No,
So
that's
just
okay.
introduce
That's okay.
yourself.
All right. Hi everyone. I'm Essel Etetere. My first name is Francis, but I technically don't use it. So let's say Essel Etetere. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
identity designer, architect. I think that basically sums me up.
You're an architect.
Yes, I'm an architect. I studied architecture in school.
Now it makes sense, honestly.
It doesn't yet, but it's fine.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so are you set? You have your slides with you.
Yes, the slide is ready.
All right, now take the floor.
So once again, thanks. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of whatever they were doing to join this session. I know it's a Saturday evening. Some people had plans, and unfortunately, you have to spend it with me. So this session is also probably one of the first ones I think the team has put together in a long while. I have followed, I think, Àṣà Coterie for quite a while. So I've been to all the other sessions. I've listened to all the other speakers in the past, and then given the opportunity to share what I know, the little I do know, I see it as a big honor to share it among fellow design colleagues and seniors, people I actually even look up to in the design space. So yeah, so that's what the session is going to basically be. This session goes by. I hope everyone can hear me. Hello.
Yeah.
Yes,
All right,
yes, we
sorry.
can hear you.
Yeah, so this session is going to be what it's titled Branding with Confidence. So making logos that work. That's basically the premise of it. As identity designers, I think that's one of the main challenges we have, where we do make marks that we feel should work, could work, but then at the end of the day, when we present it, we even have doubts when we have like setbacks where the client might even say, oh, he doesn't like it, but you don't know if it works or it doesn't work. So this session is just going to be me sharing what I think could be an approach or approaches that you could look forward to whenever you're thinking of putting together an identity, specifically just a logo. So it's not going to be like the whole visual identity or even like the verbal or strategy and all. It's just specifically making the logo, which is the minutest aspect of the whole identity, work. So I'll just like to start with a quick intro about me. I think I already did that. So I'm an identity designer, have been for like specifically for I think like the last 5 years. I studied architecture in school, so identity design was like my second love. It sort of just happened. I sort of just hopped on from architecture into graphic design space, and after a while, I just realized I had a thing for just how identity systems worked and what logos could do for any business or a brand or what's not. I just liked how you could use one single mark that could mean so much and could say so much. So I think that's what's pulled me towards becoming an identity designer, specifically that. Um, you can call me an intermediate optimist as well. So that means that I'm what the French, I think they would say something like sequence as like I'm there, I'm not there, but I have hope that certain things would work or certain things wouldn't, but we just have faith and we just go. So Also a noctophile, so that means somebody who likes darkness or not too much light. So I'm sorry I can't share my face for whatever. I just don't like all those that chase attention. I'm also a journalist, so I have interest in almost everything I do, everything there is to do. So the music, sports, everything you can find me in it. So the next phase is me sharing some work I've done. So this is a slide that shows some work I've done in the past. The reason I selected this marks is because in me sharing what I'm going to talk about, it shows identity designs across the different variations and spectrums. You could find some of them. So you could see some of them are just word marks. Some of them are just, how to call you have like an illustration of sorts. Some of them are arranged in different ways. Some of them are, how to call it, just the symbols themselves. So all these are just to show the different spectrums of some of the things you could do with identity design um, across like whenever you're designing an identity. So the next part is just a content slide. So it just shows you what is this is going to be. So the first part is just introduction. That's what it is. I couldn't find a more fancier word to put it there. So let's just call that an intro. And then the second part is what makes a bad logo. I think that's one thing a lot of designers would like to know. And then the next one is an attribute of what's probably a successful logo could be like, or what a good logo could be like. And then what could be some quick fire, say, principles that you can use to evaluate any identity. So in the sense that you now know what the characteristics of what a good logo should be, what then can you use also to say, cross-check if this works or this doesn't work. And then the final part I added was to just have a way to brainstorm identity designs that could help, so that if you feel stuck, maybe you design a mark and feel like, oh, this is the only mark that comes to mind. What then becomes your next approach? So we're going to start with some quick fire terminologies. That's what this is. So I think most people understand what they mean. I just want to go over it so that we're just on the same page. So when you mention a brand is literally the broadest term of everything. It's everything that has to do with a business, a person, organization, and it includes everything from visual to verbal to everything that is connected to what makes an identity, that makes like an identity. Let me just use that. So the second part is a corporate identity. The corporate identity is just the physical manifestation of it. So what you do with the logos, the symbols, the stationery, signage, and whatnot. All right. Next one is corporate image. So this is the part where the famous quote that says the brand is people's gut feelings comes in, because the brand itself has all these other aspects of it, but then the image it portrays is what people see and can say that becomes the perception you have about it. And this usually happens after the identity has been done, and you've probably done campaigns, you've put it out there, and people have seen it. Then people then develop a perception for it. So that's where the whole brand's gut feeling thing comes in. The next part is just what a symbol is. A symbol, so graphic elements combined to represent or identify a concept. I think that is pretty self-explanatory. And then the last one is just what logos are. Logos is basically Greek for word. So that's what people often use to mean graphic representation of a brand. So I think those are the main things I'll just touch on. All right, so after all that, I think the first thing that comes is that what then is the essence of making a logo? I think that's what it is. And then this slide basically just says that the underlying essence of a logo is to identify. That's the basic premise. It could be product, it could be service, it could be thing, it could be whatever it is. At the end of the day, it needs to work as an identifier, as a signifier. People need to know it and know that this is what it is, case closed. Nothing more than that. People just need to be able to pinpoint. So it doesn't have to be all fancy or all splashes here and there. It doesn't have to be cool or whatnot. It just has to be something people can remember, can easily see it, can even reproduce with little, how should I say, effort. You need to be able to make it work and across as many touch points as possible. And usually people don't know that meanings are assigned to logos. It's almost like coming on this earth as human beings, we assign meaning to things. A tree doesn't know itself that it's a tree based on you calling it a tree. It's human being that assigned a name to it. That's why when you go to a different place, different language, you can assign a different word, a different lesson, and it has a different meaning. So cultural context can always differ, and that can influence what even the meaning of a thing is. So when it comes to identity design, it's the same thing. It gets its meaning after it's made. So we are the ones who are signed. So based on its association with a brand or organization, then people recognize it as this is what it is for this brand. It's not the reverse. It's not like the moment you do it, then it has a meaning. No, we assign the meaning to it. Otherwise, it's just an abstract shape or letter or word or what's not. All right, the next thing I will talk about is, so then what makes a bad logo? Those are the basic premise. What then makes a bad logo? These are, I think, about seven pointers I think should suffice in terms of if you are trying to think through what makes a bad logo. The first thing is lack of visual hierarchy. People would want to be able to how to call it, whenever you see your identity or your mark, people need to be able to tell the different layers of it. The same weight or the same way you write the, shall I say, the main, how to call it, logo mark itself or word mark would not be the same way you write the subheading or the slogan or what's not. All those things have reasons. So we need to be able to tell, how to call it, the different, how it's displayed. We need to be able to tell um, we need to be able to, sorry, we need to be able to see the visual hierarchy in that. The next one I would want to talk is typography. You would want to also be able to do the necessary due diligence when it comes to a logo, but then oftentimes we make mistakes like people don't pay attention to the kerning and tracking and what's not. Also, people don't choose the right types, maybe for what the identity is supposed to be. We don't pair identities correctly. What all those things are things to also look out for. The next thing I would want to also touch on is, so even with the typography, there are several types, like I mentioned before. A serif type could be something you use for, say, classic and elegant, to mean classic and elegant. A sans serif could be something that means more like, should I say, crisp. It has crisp edges. It means something that is more bold or something that is more how to call it, fixed or what's not. You could have a slap serif that is something that feels a bit more ragged, or you could have even display scripts, so many other things. But then the next thing I would want to, and also people tend to also, when it comes to typography, people tend to use too many. It might be ideal to just limit it to a number, probably 2, 3. Even if it's 3 is extreme, but then 1 or 2 should suffice. And even it could be the same type but different weights. Those are things that people also need to take attention to. The next one is too complicated, and then the symbolic relevance. Many a times, sometimes people tend to pick elements because they think, oh, this would work, then this will work, then this will work. And before you realize, you have so many things cluttered all together. And at the end of the day, the identity loses the basic idea you would want to convey because it's conveying too many things. So those are things that also I think makes a logo a very, should I say, a bad logo. The next one is cliche. People tend to use, say, you go to Google, on Google, and then you find, say, PNG, or you find a clip art of something that you think, oh, this explains what I want to do. So then you put it there because yes, that's what it does. So somebody will just, maybe he's doing let's say an identity for a shoe brand, and then because of that he puts a shoe there. It's not wrong, but then the execution is the thing. You don't need to be too literal and too, shall I say, plain about it. You could do it in a way that could still symbolize that, but it's subtle enough to carry the message, and it doesn't look just like ordinary, like anything that anybody could have picked up from even online to stick together. Again, it's being able to work in black and white. I think that's the basic premise. It has to work in monochrome colors because you don't know where it's going to be used for. It's going to be used on. You need to be able to make sure that it works across whatever color spectrum you want to, but then ultimately, if it works in black and white, I feel it conveys like it can work at any point. Once you add the colors to it, it just, how to call it, adds up to the whole mark itself. And then it's not memorable enough. I think when it comes to memorable, it's always down to, if all the things I've mentioned before apply, then people would have, it would be easy for you to remember. People remember simple shapes. So simple shapes doesn't mean that you need a square, just a square, how to call it, a rectangle, a circle, maybe a triangle. You could also have curves and whatnot. That's why even things as complex as, say, even the Versace logo and whatnot, people could still remember them because of the use of simple shapes to even make them. So even the curves and all those things are all part of it. So, and then the last but not the least is scalable. That is the main thing. It has to be able to be scalable. You have to be able to minimize it to the barest minimum pixels you need, and even increase it as many as you need for your work or whatnot. And it has to suffice across all those levels and across all those surfaces. Okay, so the next slide then would be on where logo. I think I already mentioned this in the past that Paul Rand says it in his Design and Form in Chaos. He says it that a logo derives its meaning from the quality of the thing it symbolizes. It's not the other way around. So that is basically, I think I already mentioned that in the previous slide. A logo doesn't have a meaning by itself. It's we who assign it. So the thing that it's trying to symbolize or trying to explain is trying to identify is what gives it the meaning. So that is something to think about. Yeah. So then after that, I think the next thing to look at is so then what are the attributes of a good logo or a successful one? So these are grouped into 8. I think I've so it's almost like a reverse of what makes a bad logo. Then obviously, if you find the answer to what makes a bad logo, then it's almost technical like a reverse. But these are the 8 ones that there are many more. Some people have less than that. Some people have just 3. I think most during my research, I think most identity designers I do know stick to about say the first 4. So simplicity, being distinctive enough. So let's say differentiation, being appropriate or relevant, and then being memorable. I think those are the main 4 people go with. But it being scalable, versatile, legible, and the quality of how you execute it is also part of the things that makes a logo successful. So I'll just go quickly through all these 8. So the first thing when it comes to simplicity is that the use of simple shapes. I think I mentioned that before. The use of simple shapes, use of 1 or 2 colors makes it easier to work with. You could use multiple colors. You could explore as much as you want, but then at least let's have it work in its barest minimum. To use simple shapes, not too many colors. And then you can testify to it that if you've noticed in the past few years, most identities that were very detailed and very even the illustrative ones have tried to refine it to work in much more simpler how do much more should I say much more smaller shapes. Should I say much more fewer shapes. Yes, sorry. They've been able to make it work in fewer shapes than it was before. So then you take something like, say, the Starbucks logo. Now it has been refined and refined and refined to the point where it's not as much as was before, but still keeps the basic idea of what the mark is. And then another thing I want to highlight is that the important is that you need to have one idea or one theme that drives what the identity is. So whatever message you want to convey has to be that one thing that you run with, and that is what is going to be the main thing about the logo you do. And then simplicity does not mean minimal. People assume that the fact that you say it, how to call it, a logo has to be simple means that it has to be minimal. So if you see most identity designers now, some of them just stick to very minimal design, saying that okay, then it means that they're sufficing, they are making sure that the identity fits into it. Simplicity here means that just use much more fewer shapes. There are certain brands that need the illustrative aspect of it. They need that illustrative feel to give it character. Certain brands need that detail to it so that it makes it feel like it's very like authentic or convey that yes, this is what it is. And if you remove that, it loses that feel. So, but it's like the idea here is that you need to be able to communicate that in much more simpler way without using too many elements. So that is what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean minimal. The next one, which is distinctiveness, has to do with. So during my research, as human beings, I found out that on average, that's according to the Nelson Media Research, we come into contact with over 500,000 brands, usually even per day. So it means that you've probably in your lifetime have seen God knows how many brands, and then also how many identity marks. And then you as a human being, being able to have so much identities out there, how then do you now make yours stand out? That becomes a big challenge. Some people even, I think one link on Quora said about one people have seen 1.5 million. I think another person in his reports was saying that I think people see almost like 50,000 ads per day. So it's a lot, it's a huge number of identities and arts people get to see. So then how does your own stand out in a space like that? And usually when it comes to that, the basic thing is for you to do research. The research here is researching what your competitive landscape is, researching what other brands are doing. But the idea is not to replicate it. People tend to do that. They assume that, okay, because all these brands are doing this in this space, then it means that we also have to follow suit, and then it makes us, But then the idea is that no, you want to end up putting an identity that works in that space, but then it doesn't have to be a replication of whatever is in the space. So you could study the identities, the colors, the graphic elements, all the things that make up whatever a competition is doing or whatever is in a competitive space. And then you come up with something that works for you, probably even solving all the problems those other brands couldn't solve with theirs. All right. So the next one I'll talk about is appropriateness. So when it comes to appropriateness, you can virtually call that relevance. It's like I mentioned before, also, human beings make associations, and human beings are the ones who assign meaning to things. So, for instance, even when it comes to something like color, it's over the years, you being born into this world, you being trained that, oh, this color means this, and this color evokes this, you've accepted it. So, it's the collective acceptance by all of us that something means this, and we've assigned that meaning to the thing that has now led to us coming to acceptance that, hey, this mark, if it's used in this space, it will work for this, or this mark, if it's used in that space, it will work for that. So it's important that you do your research and then you go with that. Also, don't make assumptions, right? When it comes to identities, you don't need to make assumptions. A mark that might work here in, say, in this part of the world might not work in another continent because, again, cultural differences, or how to call it, certain biases, or people's upbringing. It could be so many factors that could influence how an identity is perceived in a certain space. So you need to do your due diligence to make sure that it works, your identity works in the space you are in. And even if you need to move it to another space, then you have to make a revision, probably even in the color or even in the mark, so that then it's acceptable in that space. Then it's that happens. All right. The next thing I'll talk about is memorability. I think that's the basic one. One idea, a simple shape, those things can be easier to remember versus so many things. That's why people tend to gravitate towards the famous Nike logos, the Adidas, the Apple logos. Those things are much, much more straightforward. People see it, okay, this is what it looks like, this is what it means, we are good. Nothing too complicated about it. And again, typography treatment, the way you treat your type, you could even explore the use of negative spaces. All those things add up to being something that people can easily remember. So again, the famous FedEx logo, people easily remember it just because of that type treatment that has now literally given that space that now means something. All right. Yeah, I think that's it with memorability. The next one is scalability. Scalability is not so different from it being able to be versatile, but then the huge difference here is this. When it comes to a brand being scalable, I think what most people are looking for is that the icon works in small and large spaces, large cases, right? So you need to be sensitive of all the touch points and all the places there's going to be social media, favicons, whatnot. If it has to work at, say, 8 millimeters, how can it also work at, say, 8 meters or 10 meters? So you need to be able to think of how the mark is going to work. Also on even the mockups, when you do mockups for them, how would that also look like, right? Yeah, so one thing I do know is that some brands in those cases, something like even Google, for instance, Google has a wordmark version, which is the usual logo that everybody knows. But then when you look at, say, the favicon, or even when they use, say, the app itself, the logo that they use, they don't even use the name itself. They have a logo custom made, which is just for that. It's not going to be used to replace the Google anywhere else, but it could be used in those use cases where, so you can make actually other marks that is all connected to the same identity, but then used for different use cases. So you have different variants, different sizes. Then when it comes to it being versatile, the idea is that it has to work in whatever complex position you put the logo in. So if it has to work, how to call it, It has to work on different surfaces. It has to work on different colors. It has to work on different materials. How you even do your lockups. So the position of the logo, maybe you position your icon to the left and then the word markers comes to the right. Or maybe you have the full name of it. Could even put the logo above it. Could even stack the names. All those ways you put the logo should work, and even all the surfaces and wherever the logo is used has to also work. So, and one thing that I think, I don't know if this, I hope this is helpful to a lot of people, is for instance that the idea that white on black, those issues when it comes to identity design, the weight variance could happen. It's a phenomenon that is called, how do you call it, irradiation phenomenon, where you could have a logo that optically on white might look fatter than it looks black versus, how do you call it, then we have a black version on white. So those things are things to, so you put a logo that is black on white versus a logo that is white on black. For whatever reason, your eye picks the white on black a little fatter than even the black on white. So how do we tweak it so that it also looks and works in all those spaces? The next one is legibility, which is just making sure that people can easily identify it. And then there is not too much gimmicks and too much like we call it cache here, like too much effect and too much garnishing of the logo, so that you feel like, yes, now I've done something that feels like, yeah. Because I know, again, certain kind of client people work with, we tell them that the logo doesn't work because, again, it's too small. This is not to work in isolation, because you need to have a second eye to assess if this logo works, or not even just works, people can identify it. Probably you do it and it looks great to you or looks great on PC. What about how would it look on phone? How would it look to somebody who probably is color blind or whatever spectrum it is? So all those things have to be also thought through. And then the last one is quality. So your quality of execution, that's what basically it is. So you have to make sure that the logo, the color choices work, the type you choose when you pair them together, even when you make your own type or the way you customize it, does the logo work on all those cases? And then the choice of shapes, the choice of curves, all those things have to, like, it has to look crisp. And then again, the question mark with the grids is, it's left to you. Certain designers don't tend to call it stick too much with the grids. The idea of grids is to be able to refine it so that it works, and you know that this, all the, how to call it, the shapes work perfectly, all the curves work perfectly. There's no imperfections here and there, and things are not, as I say, wrongly balanced and whatnot. But then again, certain people feel it confines them. It doesn't make it easy for them to whatnot. So the idea is to do it. Then afterwards, you try and make sure that you could have it to fit that, how do you call it, the grid. So the next slide is is called Principles for a Logo Evaluation. I think I heard this from Michael Schmitz. He has a book called Logo Design Theory. And this is what he said, that now that you know all those characteristics of what makes a successful logo, this is how you measure every logo you see. So it's, some of these things are just like part of, like, they're overlapping with the previous things I've mentioned. But then if, for instance, the identity has already been done, how then do you measure if a logo works or it doesn't? So the first thing he said is black and white. I think that always covers everything. If it works in black and white, it's likely to work almost anywhere when you add colors and whatnot. Again, you always go to the Apple logo. For instance, I think the Apple logo on their website is in gray. I think it's like a gray background or dark background, and it works. And people easily see it. It is what it is. Again, so it has to work in monochromes. Then the second one was called lack of mass. So lack of mass here means that when you reduce the pixels, when you might have done the mark and you think it works, looks great and all, but when the size it gets to a certain pixel, it becomes like a single pixel. It becomes very difficult to see. So it might even be swallowed by the background, or it might look too thin that the eyes can't recognize it from afar. So if you do so much elements and you think that, oh, I've done all those things, so even the weight could be affected. Or when you have too much elements, it might look great. It might look so like cool with the way it looks, but from a distance, would that even still work? It might not. The next thing he says is contrast. So contrast has to do more with legibility. People have to be able to identify it. And Is it does it work in that sense? The next thing would be harmony. So harmony is trying to make sure that everything fits. One, does it even fit the company you're going to do it for? And then also, does it align to the story you're trying to tell? Does it align to the story you're trying to tell? Does the curves and the lines, they look like every element you've chosen connects and everything looks like it works well together? If it does, then at least you have something that is almost harmonious in that sense. The next thing he highlighted was overlaps. Overlaps here basically is when people try to do like engraved logos and try to do all those gradients and all those whatnot. It's cool and all, but then would it work when you try to reduce it to the basic premise of minimal number of colors, black and white, all this? Would all those ones also work in those spaces? If not, then you might have to just, well, that's why even those marks you've seen in the past where you used to have a lot of like engravings, and it might not work in certain use cases, might not work on certain, how to call it, stationery or mock-up or whatnot you do. Yeah, the next one is unrefined shapes. So unrefined shapes is you making sure that at least when you've done the mark, you try to tweak it and make sure that it fits and looks good in all cases. Some places shouldn't feel maybe say fatter than certain places, and some places thin, or everything should look like it has been properly done well, and all the anchors and whatnot of the mark all looks properly like thought through. So you could then use grades. And then the last thing he highlighted is the use of tiny elements or tiny lines. So again, I think the idea is to make sure that if you are using marks that are very small or very, how to call it, minimal, you need to be able to make sure that it works. If not, you would have issues with that when people get to see, how to call it, the identity itself. So I think based on all that I've said so far, one might ask, then the next question will be that, okay, so at this point, then what do we do? So because we now have all this knowledge, okay, this is what the characteristics of a good logo is. This is what a bad logo looks like. These are the things I need to look out for. Then somebody will say, okay, so at this point, what then do I do? So then it now comes down to a quote by Connie Betzel that says that the best, I have just canceled out the brands, but it's the same thing. So I just wanted to replace it with logos. So it makes like sense in what I'm trying to talk about. It says the best logos marry intelligence and insight with imagination and craft. That is the basic premise. It has to be able to be, you do your due diligence when it comes to research, you do your due diligence with all your creativity and stuff, but make sure that everything is connected, everything works together. So that is the basic premise. So the next part is me now saying, okay, now we know all these things. We know that this is what a good logo is supposed to be then. Well, how then do we come up with logos? Because again, most people will be like, okay, I've done all these things, I know all these things, but now I want to make logo. And maybe I even struggle and I do one and I'm done. I don't have ideas. So these are some ideas that people try to work with. You try to, first of all, establish a clear sense of direction. You tell yourself, okay, this is the theme we are going with for this mark. This is the direction we're going for this mark. And then you run with that, and then it becomes your guiding like principle that you work with. So you could do, how to call it, create a brief. You could, how to call it, try to do your research to understand what the business is about, what the audience is about, how to call it, competition, all the things you need to do. So in terms of research, strategy, whatnot, to make sure that you have a sense of direction, that this is what the identity has to be. And the second one is creating, what is say, discovering the appropriate feel. So this is more like an aesthetic and say, okay, how do I want people to perceive my mark or my logo in terms of feel? Because you want people to have an emotional response to the logo beyond just you've done something that looks cool. So how do you want people to perceive this when they get in touch with it? Then the next one I would mention is mood boarding. Mood boarding, I think when it comes to brainstorming identities, mood boards are very essential to help you have like a pictorial imagery of what you want to do. So you sample images of the images that convey the feel, the fonts that you want to use, or the typefaces you want to use, designs, anything that helps you focus the direction and the feel and capture it in images. So it's basically just like exploring what people have done and then trying to put together it's then you try to present that in a way that you feel okay, this is what conveys what I'm trying to do, or maybe there's another option that conveys what I'm thinking about. Then you could have several mood boards, as many as you please. Some people stick to 2 or 3 or whatnot, but again, if it's essential that you have as limited a number to be easier to work with versus having so many that you can't how to call it, structure your thoughts too well. So let's stick to say 1 or 2. The next thing is to sketch everything. I think that is the main thing. To always sketch. People always try to avoid this, like, oh, maybe I don't know how to sketch. Maybe mine is to use a PC. Then quickly I'm able to put my ideas together. It's great and all, but the idea of sketching means you can easily do something with. It could be pen, pencil, whatever you use for sketching, but it helps you put ideas quickly to paper, to surfaces, to say that, okay, this is something that has come to mind. Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? The next thing is also word maps. Word maps are basically like you're finding words and making connections. You're making associations with that, anything that is related to the logo or the business or brand that you want to communicate with the, like the logo. So let's say you're making a business that has to do with something has to do with dancing. So anything, any business that has to do with, say, salsa or any of the dancing variants you can have out there, you try to just make connections with words so that it gives you ideas to explore. That's all it is. Picture maps is similar to that, but this time you try to focus just on icons, shapes, and symbols. That's what it is. So icons, in the moment you think of it, instead of writing the word that, oh, maybe this word mean is connected to this brand, instead you sketch it. It could be an icon, it could be a shape, it could be anything. So those are the basic, shall I say, the 6 basic things that usually comes when it comes to brainstorming. And then somebody summarized this is the best way I can. Aaron Draplin. It's a long quote, so I just captured what was essential for this presentation. It says, always start on paper. There is something liberating about the freedom, wobbliness, and humanity of a pencil sketch. There is speed to it and unpredictability. Accidents happen. There is more to the quote than that, but I think at that point, saw the idea of what I was trying to communicate, that at any point in time, just sketch. And that it's in that freedom to be able to try things, make mistakes, that gives you the opportunity to discover identities or logos that might work or could work or will work. You never know. It's much more difficult if you just jump on PC and say, hey, before somebody say, okay, because I didn't know how to do this on the PC, then I was what should I say, my progress was hindered because of the limitation of the PC or whatnot. No, it's the idea of you sketching gives you that freedom to do almost anything. So then it gives you the opportunity to explore as much as you can. So that unpredictability makes magic happen. So I probably should have replaced the accident with magic, but yes, you get the point. So yeah. So the next thing I wanted to highlight was, okay, now that we know this, now we know some of the brainstorming ideas, what then do we do? So I was like, the next thing I would want to go back to was, I wanted to go back to highlight, then what are the variations of logos? Because that's what I think, that's where people always have a challenge. There are several approaches, but this is one that again, from, how to call it, Michael Schmidt's logo design theory book. He has several approaches, but then I think this was what stood out for me, where you select certain variations of the logos and then you marry that with certain approaches. So I'll just go through them. The first one, I named it type marks because I was trying to find a better way to, how to call it, combine marks that basically focus on typography and then marks that, how to call it, some like even a word mark and whatnot. So there are type marks, there are ISO types, there are imago types, and then there are ISO logos. Those are the basic 4 variants when it comes to logos. Some people try to separate certain number, but I think this captures almost every version of logo there is. I'm not sure there is any other mark that falls outside any of the spectrum. Yeah, so the first thing is type marks. So basically, as the name goes, you probably understood it or you guessed it. Marks that are basically made of typography. So again, like I think the first thing I highlighted was that I found that it's usually for consumer goods or consumer products and whatnot. And then the basic ones are sans serifs, the serifs, and then script types. All right. So an example you could see is probably the Gillette logo or even the Prada or the Kleenex. Those marks are just word marks or type marks, as I'll call them, using just specific type and then just minimal tweaking to it. So you minimal like maybe they just combined the set two types, two letters, or they tweaked it in a certain way, or they made little like how do you call it, edits here and there, if I should put it that way. Word marks, I'll put them under this, but again, it was, I felt, because when it comes to word mark, you take for instance, say the Dell logo, it's basically a word mark, but then they made a tweak to the E that ends up coming across like it's like a combination mark that people have, like, you've done multiple things, but it's still read as like a word mark. Yeah, so that's what basically type marks are. The next one is isotypes. Isotypes are much more broader. There are 6 variants to it. Even so, under the 4 variants I mentioned, when it comes to isotypes, you have other 6 sub groupings under it. So those are, so an isotype is basically, like I said, representation of a brand without the use of a word. So the first one is type marks, which is use of the word. Then the second one is just a visual abstraction. So it's going to be imagery that doesn't necessarily just use just the word to explain what it is or to identify what it is. So the 6 types there are monograms, anagram, initials, acronym, pictogram, and then signature. Signature comes here because it's slightly different from what the script in the first one was on a type mark, because when it comes to signatures, signatures are almost like seen as imagery. They're like images. They were trying to replicate the signature of whoever probably set up the company or whatnot. So that is what signatures fall under. So they're not necessarily just picking a script font and then writing something and making tweaks to it. They actually hand, probably some of them even hand sketches or hand whatever signature that the person is trying to replicate. So going through all the 6, monogram, you can start with something like, say, LG. There are so many other monograms you could look at, but I think LG is one of those monograms that is quite famous that people know. So it's just combination of, how to call it, it's just a combination of the letters to form something like an interesting shape or an interesting like design of sorts. The next one is an anagram. Anagram, not direct England, not direct English. Sorry, not direct English translation of like mixing words or rearranging it. This one is similar. It can also typically come under naming of a brand, but then the idea here is that people combine the name of the logo. They combine different words. So a logo that has several words could be combined into one, and that becomes the name of it. So for instance, you talk about, say, FedEx. FedEx basically means Federal Express. Aramex means Arabia, America, what export. So those things, they just combined the word into, like, several words into one, and that became then mark itself. And then just that's all you get for that. When it comes to initials, initials are usually just the first letter of the mark. So brands like Adobe, Pinterest, they just pick the first letter, and that becomes what becomes the logo. So the first letter, and they make the design out of it, and that's your logo. So Adobe, I think, was an A, and then just tweaked in an interesting way. That's the logo. Case closed. The next one is acronyms. Acronyms are compounds, so compound names, and that you combine into like sort of like an abbreviation. So let's say the example with HBO. And another thing about acronyms is that you read them letter by letter. So you enter something like a word. So you say HBO, IBM. That's how you read them. It's not read as, there's no way to pronounce them as one, like, how to call it, one entity. You'd have to actually mention them letter by letter. So it sounds like as a word. So that's what the identity is. And sometimes they add, like, what HBO has a circle in the middle. Some bands don't bother too much about it. The next one is a pictogram. A pictogram is basically like a symbol that represents a brand. But then usually in the cases like that, people have become so used to it that it actually could even be used without a word, and people still know what it is. So you have the Apple logo, you have the Twitter, even the Pepsi logo, which was before they now made it what it is. All those ones were easier to the eye, easy to remember, and much more straightforward. The next one is signature. And so signature, like I said, it could pass for a logo type, but then those ones has sort of like a personalization to it. So that's one is like, for instance, say the Walt Disney logo or even Cadbury. Those ones are signatures of the actual people who thought of these companies. The last two are Imago type and ISO logo. They are basically the same thing. They are both combination of an icon and a symbol and then a word mark in one design. But then the difference is with Imago type, um, the mark can have its like individual characteristics, can be separated and still used as that. But with an ISO logo, you can't separate it. That's the main difference between those ones, because it takes a mark like, say, even Burger King, the burgers have to be there with the name Burger King. MBS logo, if you take out a human being, it stops being the MBA logo. But Adidas, they've sold, or Adidas or even Nike, you could use the type, even you could even use the logo itself without even the name, and people still know that's what it is. So those are the things that main too with that. And then when it comes to the approaches are, you have to look at how, what do you, the approaches are the other side of the spectrum. So now that you know the variants of the logos, the approaches now tells you other things you could also look at. So these are grouped into occupation. So you tell us like you could study what the brand then does, or you could study association. What are the ideals of the brand? What is it trying to how to call it associate with? What does it want people to remember it for? And also the next one is the name of the logo, who they are, and also abstract shapes. It could be any abstract shape at all. So for instance, let me just give you the examples here. For instance, Animal Planet. Animal Planet, in trying to explain what they do, use an elephant of sorts, but then that literally just gives you the idea that it has to do with animals. Case closed. It's supposed to identify, okay, this brand has to do with animals. It doesn't necessarily tell you how this is what. So it tells you this is the occupation that they do. They deal with animals. Case closed. But when it comes to ideals, ideals are association. For instance, NBC's famous peacock logo, the reason why they did it was because they were one of the first brands who started using what they call living colors. So being using color, so like making that transition from like black and white to using colors. So they were one of the first brands who resorted to using what they call the living color. So that's why it has a color spectrum of sort of like a rainbow color. Shell logo is basically the name itself. So Shell logo looks like a shell, but it doesn't mean that it does oil, because you can of course get oil from crustaceans. You can't get them from crabs and whatnot. You don't get oil from them. But then, so the idea was to just go with an identity that works with the name. Mitsubishi, on the other hand, is an abstract. They are more or less like triangles. They are more or less like diamonds in that format, like a triangle. That's all it is. It doesn't tell you what it does. And this usually happens with, how to call it, vehicles. I think it works usually with a vehicle brand. Yeah. So now that you know this, what the idea is that pick a variant. So any of the 4 logo types I've mentioned, so ISO logos, Imago types, how to call it, all those ones, and then you can pick a concept, so a name, and all you do is just pair them. So assuming you pick, say, one each, at the end of the day, you should have probably like 16. You could have like 16 identities. So you pick a logo, you pick a, how to call it, a variant, then you pick a concept. You pick another variant, you pick another concept. Like you just do that, and that gives you the opportunity to explore. So whatever business or brand you're working for, the idea is to just make those pairings, and it begins to give you an idea, okay, what if I try a logo that is a word mark for this identity? What if I try this? What if I try that? What then just try to explore all those ones, and then you find something that works. And then obviously you can make as many samples as you want. You afterwards could have them reviewed, and then you refine. So it's always, you do all of them, then you go through them and cross check, okay, this one works, this doesn't work, then you review it, and then you refine. And then the few that you feel look great could move forward, could then be now put together in a presentation, either present 1, present 2, present 3, present as many as you want. And then afterwards, based on feedback, you can review and refine. So that is the basic idea. So the basic idea is, you know all the logo variants they are. Now you know what concept and what approaches you could use. Now just pair them, and that is how you can easily come up with some of these logo marks. So in summary, I'll just try to quickly go through this. Logos are not mockups. People tend to think, okay, I've done something, let me splash it on mockup, then boom, I have an identity that works. Logos are not mockups. Logos are not all the garnishings and flourishes people do. Logos are not just images. The images here means that not just picking one clip art somewhere, picking another clip art, and then you pair them and you, hey, I have a mark. It doesn't work like that. And last but not the least, logos are not likes or comments. People tend to be so fixated on when I put something out, hey, I had 1 million people see it. 1 million people said it's good. Maybe it is, or maybe it's not. You can't really tell with the audience you have, because again, not every member of the audience is the target audience, or are they educated enough to be able to appreciate what you've done. So again, your friends or certain people might say, "Oh, it's great," but in reality, it doesn't really work. Yeah, so that brings me to probably the end of my presentation. So I would like to ask if I will have to ask the floor if there are any questions, and I hope that at least everyone has been able to learn a thing or two, and I hope this has helped everyone. So once again, thank you for your audience, and I would like to return the mic to Garrett,
John.
right? John. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much, Essel. So now, yeah, if you have questions, you can just signal via the chat or use the raise up feature to signal that you have a question. Can we get? Yes, you can. You will get that. Okay.
Sorry, can I still be sharing screen?
Okay. You have Barry Kina. You can speak. Barry, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah. We can hear
All
you.
right, thank you very much, Francis, for the session. I have a
All right.
question.
Yeah.
When you mentioned we should try, but suggested that when trying to create logos, we should try with simplifying the shapes.
Yeah.
I have a question there. So
Mm-hmm.
I've worked on some projects where the idea or inspiration I had for
Mm-hmm.
the logo was to use more fluid shapes or lines that were more hand-drawn and personal. And then I noticed
Mm-hmm.
that some were replicated easily by other people because they were from my hand or maybe a stylus pen or something. And I
Mm-hmm.
noticed that that's important because it can be replicated, but it's the idea was for it to feel more intimate and more personal to my
Mm-hmm.
concept. So where's like where do I draw the middle line between the two as part? Do I simplify the shapes into more replicable shapes, or do I stick to the idea of retaining the concept of um, more hand drawn style? That's what I was going to ask. Thank you.
Okay. So Barry, I think when I mentioned the simplicity, I tried to say that simplicity doesn't technically mean minimal. Simplicity here means you could still, there are certain marks that need that illustrative feel so that it gives the brand that, like you said, personality, or the character that it feels more personalized, and that's okay. But then the question that arises is that now that you have that mark, how then can you refine it so that if there are ways to be able to have it convey that in much more simpler way instead of adding too many elements, can we do that? Again, if you can't do that, or if you can't do that, have you also thought of if the mark can work across all the use cases where you need them? So it's nice to have one, but you could also have variants of it, or make other, how do you call it, like make other designs of it that could work in smaller use cases or whatever spaces you need to. So the idea of simplicity doesn't mean that become minimal, or you can't do things that feel illustrative or feel like it's personalized, but then try to keep it easier, like simple enough that people can see, people can recognize it, people can like get what the mark is. I think that that's basically what it is. It's not, doesn't mean you can't do illustrative marks or you can't do marks that are more personalized or handled. It just has to be able to work.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you so much. Then I
All
have
right.
one more question, please, but it's more like personal request. I really like your typefaces, please. If you could tell me what typefaces they are. Thank you so
It's just
much.
one type, Ionic Pro. So you can, I don't know if I should type it in the chat, but you can get it from
Yes,
CoType
yes, please
Foundry.
defend it.
Yeah,
Please defend it.
Just
I think
one
you should
type.
type it. I think you should type it
Yeah,
so everyone can see it.
yeah. CoType Foundry. Yeah.
Okay. Are there more questions?
Yeah. That's all.
Like this can be like it's done with the whole presentation. So this can be a conversation on branding, brand types, and everything that's to do with branding. So if you
Mm.
are up for that conversation, you can just raise up your hand with the feature, type it on the e-message feature, or just talk. Okay. All right. Barry, anyone? Are you there? Do maybe?
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
So I have a question, right? So there's this thing that first of all, Francis, thanks a lot. Like I
Mm.
learned a whole lot. I really enjoyed this session, man. Like
I'm
I
glad.
wonder why we've not had this earlier.
I'm
And
glad.
I think I think this should be a course, right?
That's
Because
nice to hear.
like yeah, it's so detailed and it covers a lot of basics and then it shows the process.
Yeah.
So my question is this: so there's this trend that tends to happen in identity design, where for example Slack introduced their new logo.
Yeah.
I think it was done by Pentagram, and everyone was bashing it, but
Yeah.
then gradually it has grown on us. And the same thing happened with Calendly, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
introduced their new logo, and like actually saw myself falling in love with Calendly brand design. Although I had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of criticism the week it came out compared to the old logo. So I would like you to compare, to talk about that, like, um, because I believe that as a brand designer, there are strong decisions you make based on insights that everyone might not see. That maybe you know that when this logo goes out, maybe not everyone will like it, but it might be the best decision for the brand in the next 5 to 10, or just the next 1 to 10 years or so, or the next
Mm-hmm.
100 years, like in the case of Coca-Cola. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you make those decisions? Like, how do you make those decisions so that even when there is a backlash on the logo, you're able to stand strong and defend the logo? Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, Paul Rand would only design one variation of the logo and then write a like maybe 100 or more pages describing why this is the logo to go with and how to giving strict guidance on how to use it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's my question.
Okay. All right. That's quite a very filled question, but let me try and answer it the best way I can. Typically, what happens with those like any identity you put out there when it comes to logos, everybody has an opinion, especially when it's a designer involved, and it's okay. I think the opinion is okay, but then the idea is that any mark you make would grow on people. It's not. It's not a love at first sight affair that the moment I see it instantly, then I'm supposed to like it. Some people would like it, some people would not, but then it usually comes to how well it's like. I think I covered that when I talked about corporate image, is that people tend to grow on brand. So it's depending on how the campaigns you do for it, the way you publicize it, the play, like the amount of work that goes into marketing that and repeating it over and over again so that you see it everywhere. You see it. That is what ends up making people end up just accepting. Okay, it works. So I don't see, the thing is, at the end of the day, you want to have a mark that you feel works best and communicates what you need to do, and that is all there is to it. It's not about making something that everybody loves. You can't please everyone. Again, like I mentioned, there's cultural bias. There is probably whoever you learned identity from, or anything can influence a decision of any designer or any creative. But then the basic premise is that once a logo meets any of the parameters I put, like what makes the characteristics of a good logo, or what makes like the how to call it, the principles, once it suffices for those use cases, it works. That's why I said that there is a distinction when people try to say a good logo and a successful one. Successful one, at the end of the day, it has to do what it was set out to do and work for the brand. Once it does that, people might not like it at first, but yeah, eventually people go. I think even the Total Energy, the new mark they put out, yeah, I didn't like it, the gradient here and there. I felt it's too far away from what they already had. Probably they should have just refined that. But again, you see it over time. I think people just go to accept it. So yeah, I don't know if that helps. Hello.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Thanks a lot.
Okay. All right. Sure.
All right. More questions, more conversations. If you have, okay, Amos. Amos.
Okay. Yeah, good evening, John. Good evening, Francis.
Yeah.
I am us. Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. Okay, so I have this question about making about not making logos very literal. Like for instance,
Yeah.
I'm working on a project now and I'm stuck on the ideation process because
Mm.
after making my sketches and I went online, search for use like search for marks that might have the similar features. Like
Mm-hmm.
I discovered that most of my sketches are what they're available on all those vector sites already.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make it very literal. Like the business is actually a data gathering and analysis company, and like the
Mm-hmm.
main aim is actually precision. Like what they are trying to sell is accurate data, and the client is
Mm-hmm.
actually bent on, okay, I want a logo that can represent accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm stuck on not making, like, not designing something that, okay, maybe for instance now, arrows and uh, arrows are like the
Mm-hmm.
most common representation of precision and accuracy. So I don't know, in that case, what do you think one can do? I don't know if you get my question. I
Mm-hmm.
think I spoke too much.
I'm trying to follow. I think your question is what happens if you get stuck with a mark and you don't want to like whatever. I think the option you like explored has already been done and you feel like you are stuck.
Yes,
Correct?
exactly. Yes, thanks.
Okay. All right. So the way I understand this is it's usually when it comes to identity design, I think depending on what you are exploring, if you limit yourself to one approach that now you want to communicate accuracy. That's why I mentioned in the beginning that there are so many approaches people do, like picture mappings or even word maps or whatnot. You could find other words that communicate accuracy, and maybe those words could lead on to other ideas. You don't need to go with just the idea that okay, this is what it is, and then probably you stick to that. It's you need to have a theme, but then the theme doesn't necessarily mean like the words you pick. I don't know if you get me. So now you've picked a word, you've explored it, and then maybe you found that oh, people have already explored other variations of this. You there, I don't. I think what I would typically do in that situation is just to keep exploring. Like you need to give yourself time and opportunity to explore, should I say, far and wide, and also not make inferences from what is already out there, especially in just the identity space. You could actually research anywhere else outside, and it could even be even through music. Would you communicate say accuracy in music that you can link it to your data or what? So is to just try and have an extensive as possible explorations as you can. But then again, like I said, because think of it that this way that you have over 500,000 logos out there that you people have already created for. Like in the world, you have probably more than 500,000 significant logos. Let me put it that way. Significant. So then what then do you do that to still be different? It's going to be very difficult. So the idea is that to just try to make you your due diligence, your research, you found out, okay, now this is the problem you have. It's just to probably try to keep exploring, try other ways, word maps, picture maps, and then you can even try, if all those cases don't work, all the approaches I gave, all the other versions of it. You can try those pairings and see if it gives you any other idea that you could also use. So that then the idea is that at the end of the day, you want something that is different. You want to be able to differentiate yourself. So if you're going to create something that looks like every other mark out there, it becomes a problem. So I don't know if what I said helps in
Yeah,
any way.
thanks. It does. I thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
All right. So we're closing this session around 10 p.m. So, right, 9. Okay. So it's already past 9. Right. So if you guys have more questions, conversations, I just think you guys should turn on your mic and let's talk about branding with SL.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. The I've sent a question.
Okay.
Where does strategy meet the visual identity?
Okay. Strategy strategy comes in usually at the beginning of the whole project. It doesn't come in at when the logo is, like I mentioned, when it comes to the visual identity itself, the visual identity is like the logo is the almost like the minutest part of it, of the visual identity. The strategy is the first part of the whole, how to call it, the whole identity you do. So all the research you've done, all the competitor analysis you've done, all the, how to call it, vision, mission, what, everything you do before then would cover your verbal identity and strategy. But then when you come to putting together the visual identity, that is when the logo is the first part of it. Aside that, you even under the visual identity, you have typography, you have colors, you have how to call it. Uh, I'm coming. Sorry, I lost my line of thoughts. You have you have typography, you have colors, the images you choose, photography, your creative direction. Everything else comes under the visual aspect of it. So strategy helps align your thoughts and guide not only the project but then the brand and the business and everything you do. So strategy is what comes first. That's the most crucial aspect of it. You need to do your due diligence, get to know what the business is about, what the target audience are, what problem it's solving, how best it can do that, and how would it communicate to the messaging, all those things. Then all that would help guide you when it comes to the visual identity aspect of it. So then, yeah, that is what it is. So strategy first, then you delve into visual identity. You can't skip like the other. There are people who certain people can be reached out for just a logo design, but in those use cases, probably the team who reaches out to the person has done the strategy work for you. So if the person hasn't, then you are obliged to at least try to do some level of research or whatever it is to help guide you. So that is how it is.
All right, thank you. Oh, Barry again. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Have fun.
This one that John is saying Barry again. Sorry, if I'm trying to
No, no,
like
no, no, no. It's cool because,
enter into
like,
five
sorry,
questions.
everyone is open to ask questions like anytime they want, as many as
Yeah.
they can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I,
So
I
it's
want to
cool.
ask a question concerning maybe in terms of clients, right? I
Yeah.
face a problem when I want to know how much is too much for pushing an idea like to a client.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes we talk about how spicy you want to go with your design and how receptive your clients would be to it. And I've been cases where clients would say they cannot accept this based of they want the very, very stereotypical, maybe for a delivery company, they want you to put the truck and the globe and the train and
Yeah.
the cargo box. And then you're like, oh, I want to push more in a word mark and give them that word mark and just hint at subtle ideas that define brand values. So
Mm-hmm.
my question is, at what point do we submit as designers to the clients' ideas? If even though if you feel like this is what's going to be best for them, and you don't want to give a 100 page telling that is why it should be best, but you feel like you can't push more than this. So at what point do we submit? Is my question. So thank you.
I don't think you submit per se. The thing is, um, in every case where the client tries to push back, unless they're trying to be stubborn and they just don't want to get it, the idea is to try and understand why, the reasons why they feel this is what they need, and the reasons why they think this is what it has to be. And then your best is to try to educate. It's not really to tell them that, hey, take it or leave it. You try your best to educate them and say, hey, the months they are doing it for or the businesses they are doing it for, this and this and this are the cases. This is how it's done, and this is what will make them professional. Try to make them see the bigger picture that, okay, what you're doing is not something you're doing for a short period of time. It's something that has to being used for much more, should I say, longer periods. And to have a mark that is timeless enough, you need to have it as much more simpler and as much more refined as possible. Again, when you are putting together the identities, of course, certain people, again, as I said, that you can even, how can you make those things communicated in just one mark, but very much more simpler? So then maybe that it's you who has to try to put together all the things that the person wishes to see and try and sell them the idea. Worst case scenario, you try your best to push and see if the client could, but if you realize the client is not willing to learn, the client is not willing to, I don't think you can do much than try. You can't force them. It's at the end of the day, they feel some of these clients end up feeling like, hey, this is their market for them. But the reality is it's not for them. It's for their audience and every person who comes into contact with it. So you have to try your best to, what do you call it, like educate them. Again, I think let me use an example. Saji Habib mentioned in, I think, the presentation they did for Conservation International. The client pushed back the first time he saw the logo because he was like, hey, he personally, the main director of the company, Conservation International at that point, was the one who hand sketched a monkey that was on a tree, something. And he insisted that that monkey has to stay. He doesn't see why you should take out the whole tree, take out the whole forest, what, you take out the monkey, he even hand sketched. So when the Saji Habib and then how to call it, the team presented a logo that was just, I think it was a circle and then a blue dash underneath, so like a green earth and then C or whatever, like a C which is a blue dash underneath. They said no. It took them literally over 6 months because the client had time for whatever reason to actually convince them to accept the logo that it will work. So they had to do a lot of back and forth. And at the end of the day, it took them putting together a video presentation of how the simple mark they had translates to everything. So try to show them a picture of the world that evolves into the circle. Try to show them a picture of animals. So they even make sure that they did a video that had the monkeys and everything in it so that he sees that, oh, okay, his monkey is not gone. It's still part of everything he's trying to communicate in that simple mark. So you might have to go above and beyond in terms of either educating them or even how way you present it so that they can see that, okay, this can still work. So I think that's what it is. You can't force it down their throat that, hey, accept it. I don't think, how to call it, if and that's the case, if at the end of the day all these things fail, you know when your breaking point is, you just realize this might not just work. And you have to decide ultimately if this is something you'd want to see in your portfolio or something you want to see as part of something you are proud to say you did. If not, you might have to walk away.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Francis. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay. Nelson, go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Presentation. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. So, I think.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay. So I think my question.
Yeah, you can.
My question goes around the pricing aspect of branding because there's this there's this if you're doing something like architecture, you plan the building and then you give them a budget and then they give you a price for it. But for designs, for branding, it's not something like that. It's more like you're saying you're trying to approximate how the money would look like. I don't know if you can talk more about that. For me, it's a bit difficult because sometimes clients will just come and meet me and be like, okay, I want to do something like this, and they would probably want you to make the estimation between, okay, at that instant, or maybe sometimes they will give you a day, and sometimes you have to, look at the project very well because sometimes I think some people see the value and it's different for everyone. So I don't know if you can talk more on how do you, did I say accurately, assess for probably the price for a logo.
All right. So if I get your question is around pricing.
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. Let me try. I want to make this as brief as possible. I don't think there is a right or wrong when it comes to pricing. There's only a fair. It has to be a fair. Like both you and the client have to agree on something that is fair to both of you. So if a client comes up to you and says, "Okay, this is what his number is for an identity," you have to decide if you would work for it at that rate. Again, you have to also have your own rates and say that, okay, for me, maybe identity, I price them. This is the minimum mark at which I wouldn't do it. If a client walks up to you and says, "Hey, this is what I have," you can decide. Either you decide that you wouldn't work with him, or you can reduce the number of deliverables or what is listed in the amount of work you probably would do, and then still have something that work for them. So, and then I don't think for identities when people come to you and say, oh, they want it in one day, you have to just oblige. It's up to you if you so want to, but then again, I think when it comes to identity design, you need time to reflect. You might do a marked today that looks great. What if when you sleep and you wake up and you look at it again and you think it's not good? So it's usually best to give yourself a time frame, say a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I know people who sometimes even work on identities that takes months because the idea is that you want to have the best for the person. And then clients that often come to you wanting like something quickly done, I, I don't think there are people who are likely to pay you a lot. I think there are people who just want a quick fix, do something quickly for me because they assume it's no work and you're a designer and magically you have a software that probably you press design and it does it for you. And I think that's how they see it. So the idea is that you have to make sure that you tell them point blank that, hey, what you want requires this set amount of time, this set amount of work, and then this is what it's going to be, and this is my rate. If the client says, oh, I can't pay at this rate, then you decide if you want to go to have a whole like discussion about it, like, oh, can we like negotiate? If you so don't want to, and that's your minimum rate, and you want to stick by it, you can stick by it and work. It's not every project you need to accept and say, I'm doing it because, hey, you need the money. No, it's your sanity over everything. That's what it is. Is that okay? Hello?
Hello, Nelson, are you here?
He left the call.
All right.
Oh, wow. Okay. Uh, I don't know how long Essel can go, but you want to say something to maybe?
Yeah, so I wanted you to talk about project scoping and setting timelines. Like, how do you set timelines for clients?
All right. Some of those things that should I say they're like lengthier sessions to try and explain these things. But then certain timelines, I think you have to decide what works for you, right? Let's assume you give yourself a timeline and say that okay, you feel ideally if you give yourself a week to do your research or what's not, another week to do the how do you call it, all your sketching and conceptualization, mood boarding and what, another week to do the actual logo, the review, and presentation. You have to decide what your work, your how to call it, the time you can give yourself, and how you work. If you also have, there are certain cases where you probably could speed up that process and have it in shorter time frame. And probably you could charge a client probably like for an express fee if the person wants it quicker and whatnot. So there is when it comes to certain timelines, you have to decide. You have to first of all have a process. That is what is important. You need to have a system in place that, okay, I know that from the moment I come into first contact with the client till the time I execute the project and I hand off the project, this is the system in place. And now you try to quantify it in terms of how you work and then the possibility that because again if you are say a freelancer you are probably not working with for an agency or whatnot, how then would you work if you have one project assuming it takes 2 months to do, that means in a year you can only take on like say 6 projects. But what if you really need money or maybe the projects don't even pay so much and you need to take on another project, how do you handle 2 or 3 projects at the same time? So you have to quantify the workload you need to put in for any project you do, and then give yourself like a flexible timeline that allows you to have a life. You need to have a social life aside everything else you do. You need to have whatever, like do other things so you can multitask and do what you need to do. So you have to first of all have a system and be sure that that works for everything you need to do. then before you now to try to quantify that system into timelines and how many hours or how many days or how many weeks you need for all those things. And at the end of the day, you can present that when you're submitting your proposal or whatever and tell, okay, this is my process, this is my timeline. And then I think that that is the system to it.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Last question, and we just call it a day.
Hello,
Hi,
can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So pretty much this is something a lot of people usually ask, and I think it's something I also want to ask. During your project, right, where does the mood board, the style guide, and the style skip come together? Because most times people mistake one thing for the other thing. So I don't know if sometimes mood board means style skip, for instance, and then what's the style guide, and how does it come to fruition in a particular project?
Okay. Okay, let me start from this way. Mood boards stylescapes will probably come in at the research phase for the identity when you're trying to just come together like you're still exploring how to call it. You're trying to make sure that you have like initial ideas and trying to how to call it all the research you've done, trying to translate that into imagery that you can use. So the mood board and stylescapes. The only difference I think between the two is people tend to use them interchangeably, but I think what the future and other people have done well to do is that the stylescape is almost like it's much more rectilinear, if I should put it that way, and then it has to just cover the basic things like what fonts are you looking at, what colors are you looking at, what images are you looking at, what maybe are you doing illustrations, icons, all those things, and just put it in a presentation format that covers everything you'd want to like to just convey one feel or one direction you want. That's what normally happens in a stylescape. Similar to a mood board, it could just be the same thing. Certain people just pick colors or things and just arrange it the way you want. So it could be used interchangeably depending on which context you want to go with. I prefer to just call it mood board. I think it's one and the same. Style guide. I think in identity design, I don't know if it's the same for. I don't think it's the same for UI and UX. But then I think in identity design, people try to use brand guides to actually mean also style guides, and those ones come at the end of the project. So when you've actually done the whole identity, you put together a full brand guide or what maybe say brand style guide or what that document that covers everything you've done from the brand's like initial development, the research, the what mission, vision, the whole verbal aspect of it, the verbal identity, inclusive of the visual identity. So that means the logos and font, colors, what. Then all the graphic communications and every relevant information of it. And that is what becomes your brand guide or brand style guide or whatnot. I think those are the things, those are the differences. But mood board and style scapes, those one comes at the beginning. That's when you're now trying to come up with the logo itself or the identity itself. Does that help? Hello?
The I still yeah. Okay. All right. I guess it's okay. Okay. If you can't, we can't hear you, so you can just type it. Vix, I think you're up next.
Okay, hi, Francis.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Yeah,
Francis. Okay, yeah. I had a couple of questions. I hope I've not forgotten all of it.
Okay.
So, yeah. So the first I want to ask, you said something about strategy, like somehow kind of those what I say intangible processes that we have to go through before we start doing anything tangible like visual. Yeah. So I want to know to what extent, I mean, designers are supposed to get involved in dealing with stuff like the brand core, maybe the marketing strategy and all that about, and the whole of it. How inclusive are we supposed to get into it before even going about designing the visuals or identity or whatnot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. You want to answer one after that, or should I just ask all of it at the
Oh,
same time?
you ask all of them. I'll just note it down and I'll answer.
Okay. Then about the logo design, at some point you notice that after you have explored several options, or maybe you're able to define what the brand is about to yourself, or you find out from the cause of the brand or the values, or however you want to like single out one particular idea, yeah, that okay, you might have a number of things, not just one, that this brand actually is about. So how do you know which among those multiple options you have is the best that can be engrafted into the logo to ideally represent the brand? I
Okay.
don't know if that's clear. Yes. Okay, I think I just forgot the last one, but let me just stick with this one.
All right, that's true. All right, cool. So the first one is extent of strategy. I think that's what it is. You need to be as extensive as is needed for your project, but you're not a brand strategist, right? Most designers aren't. Most of the designers I know, you're literally visual identity designers. That's what it is. You just do the visual aspect of it, and then you do some research, and that is what you normally try to say is strategy. But there's a whole, if you're doing like a full on brand strategy, people do workshops and all those things, which are much, much more thorough than you do. Probably somebody will have like even a whole naming session where you actually even have to have like processes, slides, and worksheets, and anything that is so thorough. And that is not every designer. So you can focus on the visual identity itself. So you're literally a logo designer or a visual identity designer. Let me just say visual identity because the whole thing is just the logo. But then you do some research to it, and that is what I think most designers do. I don't think you need to be as extensive as probably like a full-on brand agency would do, because again, some brand agencies don't go as thorough as that. You do the usual, or how to call it, your usual, what's the name of it? Your usual first meeting call with a client. You do all the initial questions. You have to do, probably some people might even just use a questionnaire that asks a couple of questions here and there. That is fine. What is essential to get you to do the project? You ask all those questions. But if you want to go into strategy, then you probably have to explore being a full-on brand strategist. And there is much, much more broader scope of work that goes into that beyond like this. So you need to be as thorough as is needed for the project to be done. But then I don't think every visual identity designer needs to become a full-on brand strategist before you do like any of these projects. The second question is, I think you mentioning you have multiple ideas, and then how do you pick which one works best? I think that's what I try to capture in the presentation, like the one I showed, where I said that after you have all the several variations of logos, after you have all the several concepts you've explored, you would have to actually just review and then refine. That's all it is. You have to have a theme that drives the story. So if you end up having several ideas, then it means that at the end of the day, all those themes, how do you communicate? So at the end of the day, it just comes down to what theme would best represent the mark and communicate what this brand stands for, what this brand wants to do. So it has to be one theme, one direction. So you could explore as many logos as you can, but then you have to choose, you review it, then you refine, and then you keep going down. Like I mentioned again, you also don't work in isolation. There are people you can actually reach out to, show your work to people, tell them, oh, does this communicate this theme you're working on? Which one do they think? Like, it's nice to have those reviews so that then you can, when you're refining, you are gaining much more clarity on what works and what doesn't, and what best communicates what it is. So it's having a theme and a sense of direction that I think would help you in trying to figure out which of the logos you have would work. So I think that's what it is. And afterwards, you review, then you settle on what it is. And then ultimately, the client settles on one. You as a designer might even know which one works best. So in some cases, that's what happens. After you review, refine, then somebody can even just settle on just one and say, hey, this is the one that would work. You submit it in. Yeah, a client might say yes or no. So I think it's having a direction, a sense of direction, and I think that's what it is. So I hope that answers you. I don't know if
Yeah,
it
sure.
answers you. All right.
Thanks very much.
No problem. You're welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, Essel. If you have more questions, you can just tweet to Essel, and he will answer your questions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or keep them on D. Yes, put them on D or answer the questions. So,
I would answer. Yeah.
all right. So, thank you guys for stopping by. Like, we've not done this in a minute, right? And it's really nice for you guys to join us. And we want to do this every week, but if you can't, we do it every 2 weeks. So we'll be talking about the different areas in design, brand design, motion, 3D, UX, UI, all those kind of stuff. All right. So thank you so much for this. Everyone will have access to the slides, and please fill the feedback form, and you can also check out the YouTube playlist for our previous sessions. And if you would like to join this community, I think you guys will find the waitlist somewhere. Yeah. Thank you so
On
much for
Twitter.
joining. Yeah, on Twitter. Yeah. So yeah, have fun. Drink and drive. Right, and have fun. Thank you guys for joining. Yes.